The first time I saw her, she wasn't a statue at all. She was a sketch, a wild dream scribbled in charcoal on a sheet of paper. Yet even in that raw outline, I felt my chest tighten, because I knew I was looking at the birth of something far greater than stone or copper. I was there when Lady Liberty was nothing but an idea, when Auguste Bartholdi's hands trembled with vision, when no one believed she could exist. And somehow, against storms, doubt, and distance, I watched her rise from a dream in Paris to a giant in New York Harbor. I can still recall, as vividly as if it happened yesterday, the very first time I set foot inside Bartholdi's workshop in Paris. The air was thick with the smell of metal filings and damp wood, the hiss of heated copper sheets meeting hammer and chisel. My ears rang with the rhythm of labor, the clanging of hammers echoing like 1,000 church bells. And there, amid the noise and smoke, stood Auguste Bartholdi himself, hunched over a sketch that seemed to consume his entire being. I remember leaning over his shoulder, catching my first glimpse of what looked like a colossal robed woman, her torch raised defiantly toward the heavens. Even in that rough charcoal outline, I sensed something larger than life. My heart quickened, for I knew I was witnessing not merely the drawing of a statue, but the conception of a symbol that would outlast empires. Bartholdi's voice carried a kind of fever. He spoke not of stone and copper, but of ideas, of liberty, of friendship, of nations bound by a shared hunger for self-determination. France had recently been humbled by war. Her pride was wounded, her people restless. Yet here was an artist dreaming not of revenge, but of unity. A gift, he said, from France to America, to honor the centennial of their independence. A gift from liberty herself. His eyes, dark and restless, burned with conviction. He told me that he imagined this figure rising in New York Harbor, the first sight for weary immigrants arriving after weeks on the ocean. She would be their welcome, their promise of hope. In those years Paris was a crucible of ideas. The salons buzzed with chatter of democracy, of the balance between freedom and order. Some laughed at Bartholdi, dismissing his dream as folly. Too expensive, too impractical, too grand for any government to support. But he was relentless. He journeyed to America, studied the harbor, measured the light of the setting sun against the horizon where his colossus might stand. He returned with renewed fire, and soon the foundries of Gadget, Gautier and Company echoed with the sounds of creation. I was a young assistant then, tasked with simple duties, fetching tools, polishing copper sheets, but I saw everything. I watched as enormous wooden molds were built, as craftsmen pounded copper plates over their curves until sparks flew. Gustave Eiffel, the engineer who would one day build his famous tower, devised the iron skeleton that would support her weight. I touched those iron ribs myself, cool under my hand, and wondered whether they might outlast us all. The workshops thundered day and night. We worked until our arms ached, until our ears rang with hammer blows long after we had gone to bed. There were moments of wonder too. I remember the day Bartholdi unveiled the face. We climbed high scaffolding, balancing on planks slick with grease, and there she was, a serene visage, calm yet commanding. Later, in a quiet corner, Bartholdi admitted he had modeled her features on his own mother. I was stunned. To think that the most public of monuments, destined for the gaze of millions, bore the likeness of a private maternal love. It seemed fitting, though, what force in the world embodies endurance and sacrifice more than a mother's face? Not everything went smoothly. The torch became our greatest torment. Rainwater seeped through seams, pooling inside until engineers cursed the design. I crawled within the dark chambers of her arm, listening to drops echo against the metal. We argued, we patched, we despaired. But Bartholdi would not surrender. A torch must shine, he insisted. Even if it fails in practice, it will blaze in imagination. When the colossal figure was finally complete, another monumental task awaited, dismantling her. Piece by piece she came apart, reduced to 350 fragments, packed carefully into more than 200 wooden crates. I walked through the warehouse where they were stacked, the smell of pine and tar thick in the air, each crate labeled like the bones of some mythical giant awaiting resurrection. Watching the ship Isère prepare to depart, I felt a pang in my chest. Would she survive the long Atlantic crossing? Would America embrace her? Or would she remain forever a dream that left Paris but never truly arrived? I crossed later, following her trail. The Atlantic was merciless. Storms lashed the deck, salt spray burned the eyes, and yet I clung to the thought of her copper skin gleaming again under a different sun. When at last we reached New York Harbor, the city rose like a fortress of smoke and steel. Immigrants crowded the docks, their voices mingling in a dozen languages. I saw in their faces the same mixture of fear and hope I had seen in Bartholdi's. How fitting that liberty herself had arrived in fragments, just as they had, waiting to be pieced together in a new home. But America had its doubts. The pedestal upon which she must stand remained unfinished, funds exhausted. Some claimed the project was unnecessary, that America did not need France's gift. My heart sank. But then came Joseph Pulitzer, whose newspaper launched a campaign unlike any I had ever seen. He appealed not to the wealthy but to ordinary citizens. And they responded. I watched children part with pennies, widows send their meager savings, workers drop nickels earned in sweat. Letters poured in, each coin accompanied by words of hope. The pedestal rose from their sacrifice, each brick paid for by the humble and the poor. Liberty, it seemed, would be built by the very people she was meant to welcome. By 1886, construction on Bedloe's Island was a frenzy of activity. I climbed the scaffolding daily, the harbor winds biting at my face, the smell of tar, rope, and salt water mingling in the air. Ships entered the harbor below, their decks crowded with immigrants craning to see what we were building. I wondered what they thought, seeing her ribs exposed, her copper skin half-riveted. Did they sense, as I did, that she was already alive, straining to rise? The day of completion arrived with the crisp air of autumn. We tightened the last bolts, secured the final copper sheets, and descended, our bodies aching with exhaustion. And then the scaffolding came down, plank by plank, rope by rope, until at last she stood revealed. The torch caught the light first, gleaming defiantly. Then the crown, 7 rays like the sun itself. Finally, her full height, majestic, serene, undeniable. Lady Liberty. I stood among the throngs on October 28, 1886, when she was officially dedicated. The harbor thundered with cannon fire. Ships sounded their horns. Flags whipped in the wind. President Grover Cleveland spoke, but I heard little of his words. My eyes were fixed on her. Around me, men wept, women clutched children, sailors doffed their caps. Immigrants who had endured weeks at sea fell to their knees. She was no longer copper and iron. She was promise itself. Night fell, and I thought of the millions yet to come. Ships would enter this harbor by the thousands, their passengers weary, frightened. But when they saw her torch, their hearts would lift. They would whisper to themselves, "There is hope. There is freedom. There is a future." I realized then that we had not built a statue. We had forged an eternal dream into metal. Now I am old, my hands stiff, my hair white. But when I close my eyes, I still hear the hammering, smell the copper dust, see Bartholdi's restless gaze. I see crates stacked like a promise, pennies dropping into jars, scaffolding rising above the waves. And most of all, I remember the moment the veils fell and Liberty stood unveiled. Her torch piercing the sky, her face, his mother's face, calm and eternal. She remains there still, watching over generations. Not merely a gift from France to America, but from humanity to itself. A reminder that liberty may be fragile, but it can be carried across oceans, assembled from fragments, and raised high enough to light the world.